Hello, and welcome to this next episode in the Natural History Project. My name is Jason Brogdon. I'm the Dean of Science Instruction for Founders Classical Academies. Today, I would like to talk about seeds of being. We knew of old that God was so wise that he could make all things. But behold, he is so much wiser than even that he can make all things make themselves. Charles Kingsley, The Natural Theology of the Future, 1874. In the seed, then, there was present, invisibly, everything that would develop in time. St. Augustine on the literal interpretation of Genesis. Between 401 and 415 AD, Augustine of Hippo penned some of his most significant aspects of the creation account and how Christians were to approach the natural order in light of the revelation of Genesis 1. Having already argued what an instantaneous creation could have looked like, he proceeded to expound on his idea that certain principles of order are contained within the creation and develop or mature at later stages when appropriate. There is a lot to unpack here. In Latin, rationes seminales, or seeds of potential, is an ancient idea preceding Christian thought, as early Christian writers noticed how Genesis 1 kept stating that the land and waters could bring forth certain types of creatures. They had drawn the conclusion that this pointed to God endowing the natural order with a capacity to generate living things. Alistair McGrath, Fine-Tuned, page 102. This was actually a Stoic idea that was further developed and appropriated by Augustine as a metaphor of seed-like principles that are alive and present from a cosmic origin point. Now, this, of course, is an analogy and a metaphor, but in science and in biology, it's replete with metaphors that help us understand. And so these seeds contain potential for development of a specific living kind. That's from Marianne Klein Horowitz, The Stoic Synthesis of the Idea of Natural Law, 4 Themes, in the Journal of the History of Ideas, Volume 35, 1974. And so here we are again, discussing the idea of a deeper level of creation in which frames, boundaries, and potentialities are established while allowing for a range of outcomes within those lines. Whether we are talking about a landscape, river, waterfall, or seed, chance versus providence becomes the flashpoint for consideration. One man's chaos is another man's freedom. It is about interpretation and evidence. It gets increasingly difficult to maintain a randomized, directionless process given the statistical improbabilities colliding with physical realities of our world, and of all the constrained fine-tuning required not just for the cosmos, but even more so for the development threshold for life. I quote, "If the chemistry of life is indeed very special, then the basic physics of our universe might need to be even more fine-tuned than previously suspected. Only a tiny tweaking of physical constants might be sufficient to prevent the crucial molecules from existing." This is from Carr and Rees, Fine-Tuning in Living Systems, Journal of Astrobiology, Volume 2. Oddly enough, even Francis Crick in 1973 wrote a paper entitled Panspermia, in which he faced these improbabilities with the notion that life was indeed seeded from outside the planet. he says, it now seems unlikely that extraterrestrial living organisms could have reached the Earth either as spores driven by the radiation pressure from another star or as living organisms embedded in a meteorite. As an alternative to those 19th century mechanisms, we have considered directed panspermia, the theory that organisms were deliberately transmitted to the Earth by intelligent beings on another planet. We conclude that it is possible that life reached the Earth in this way, but that the scientific evidence is inadequate at the present time to say anything about the probability. We draw attention to the kinds of evidence that might throw additional light on the topic. Crick and Orgel, 1973. Now, I don't believe aliens seeded the planet, but isn't it amazing that he has to invoke directed panspermia from outside the system? Intentionality and purposefulness seem to be the thrust of the concern in the above quote from one of the discoverers of the structure of the language of life. For a bit, let us entertain a different hypothesis, one that is outside of total natural verification, but one that is capable of addressing the mathematical constraints, the emergent complexity, the foundation of information, and the core dogma of biogenesis. That life only comes from life. In the seed, then, there was present invisibly everything that would develop into time, into a tree. And we must visualize the world in the same way. When God made all things together as having all things that were made in and with it, includes also the beings which earth produced potentially and causally, before they emerged in the course of time. Augustine. It is impressive that although Augustine's idea of seeds springs from his exegesis, it is surprisingly insightful in light of modern genetics. He does not advocate for a form of transmutation of species in an open, chaotic manner, but rather something more purposeful and conservative. The elements of the physical world have a fixed power and quality which determine what each thing can and cannot do, and what can be done or not done with it. From these elements, all things which come about in due course have their origin and development as well as their end and dissolution according to their kind. Thus, a bean does not emerge from a grain of wheat, nor does wheat emerge from a bean, or human beings from cattle, or cattle from human beings, is what Augustine says. In the present order is what we're referring to. Time would be needed for anything to change. This could be misconstrued as a tight fixity of species approach, but any geneticist would concur that heredity has rules and that taxonomic categories can shift. Likewise, Augustine is not advocating randomized chaos in the living world. Seeds as packages of genetic material communicate information and meaning through time for future organisms to employ. Theologically and philosophically, fine-tuning needs to be distinguished from design. They are related in some ways, but fine-tuning is a bottom-up method, while design is more like a top-down approach. Fine-tuning respects the inductive nature of modern science as it asks the fundamental questions within biology, as it does in astronomy and cosmology. The Cambridge meeting concluded that there is no doubt that the biophilic character of our universe depends on apparent fine-tuning of various key parameters in physics and cosmology. As Craig Hogan emphasized, even slight changes in some of these numbers would lead to a universe that would be sterile, and that it could not fulfill even the most basic requirements for life. Carr and Rees, page 83. In order to be cohesive, while taking a moment to pause and reflect on what all of this could mean for a newly constructed natural theology, needed in the present and of the future, a newly devised view of evolution needs exploration, construction, and articulation on many levels, in multiple disciplines simultaneously. Because the view that evolution is open-ended, without predictabilities, and indeterminate, in terms of outcomes is negated by the ubiquity of evolutionary convergence. The central point is that because organisms arrive repeatedly at the same biological solution, an example would be the camera eyes of vertebrates and cephalopods, or wings of bats, birds, and reptiles. These are the most famous examples. They provide not only a degree of predictability, but more intriguingly, point to a deeper structure of life, a metaphorical landscape across which evolution must necessarily navigate. This is in Simon Conway Morris's Darwin's Compass, How Evolution Discovers the Song of Creation, 2006. Navigation is intentional and driven. How is this navigation accomplished in real time with organisms? Is there a physical basis we can focus on? Are there realms within biology begging for a new synthesis? To that, we will explore the thoughts and language of the French. But prior to that, let's survey this metaphorical and mathematical landscape of life. My name is Jason Brogdon, and I am recording on October 9th, 2025 in Lakeway Studios in Louisville for the Natural History Project. Thanks for listening.